Mother Earth?
Gaia is an ancient Greek god that's really at the pinnacle, or at really the beginning of the Greek pantheon. And from there, all the other gods sort of come forth from Gaia. And
Mother goddess.
Yeah, the mother goddess of Earth. And so now people look at the Earth, they compare her to Gaia, and they're going to worship her accordingly. And this leads to totalitarianism as well, because one of the things that environmentalism emphasizes is holism. Now, in our minds, we think this is a good thing.
Right.
Because it sounds good. We hear it all the time.
Yes.
But when you start thinking about holism, what it means is everything is mutually interdependent, including man, including God.
Right.
They're all placed under that holistic circle of life in the world that you can't get out of.
Right.
And that leads to all kinds of relationships that are going to compromise you to prevent you from acting according to God's image that God made you. And they want to keep you down. They want to keep you in that position where you're not allowed to do that. And this leads to what we call fascism. It leads to totalitarian views, and people are not able to act freely anymore because of these mutually interdependent requirements of nature that you can't act that way anymore. And of course, when they start comparing animals and mountains and flowers to be your sisters and brothers, and they have equal rights just like you do, I mean, the Constitution's gone. I mean, the laws are gone. I mean, now nature has almost priorities over people. My thesis is that the Holocaust was, rather than seen as an industrial operation, it was actually a green sacrifice of human beings under the oak trees.
That's a horrifying
Very
truth.
similar to Baalism.
Right.
And if you were to bring Baalism up to date, it would be like a Nazi fertility cult, which is what it was, dressed up in secular terminology.
It's the horrifying interface of anti-Semitic hate and worship of the earth, or occultic worship.
Yeah, it was a rebellion against really Genesis, because many of the German philosophers in the 1800s were already criticizing Jews for Genesis and treating animals like they belong to them. And Hitler's favorite philosopher, especially Arthur Schopenhauer, was big on that. And the Nazis passed an animal rights law in 1933 in honor of Schopenhauer and his anti-Semitic animal rights diatribe. And if you look at The Eternal Jew, a famous documentary film that the Nazis put out there, the animal rights is at the heart of this movie. Right before Hitler talks about he used to send them all to hell, when right in the famous speech he gives to the Reichstag, they show Jewish ritual slaughter. And they go through 3 cows and a couple of sheep, and how cruel supposedly the Jews are when they do their kosher slaughter. And that becomes the climax of the movie. And then after that, the Fuhrer shows up the first time, and he's going to give the Jews their just desserts. And there is no, and in my opinion, there's a reason why the Jews were also put in cattle cars. This was done by design. They're going to pay the penalty for what they've done. And the Nazis had very strict rules for animals on trains. Very strict, for animal transport. But they were all broken when they sent the Jews into the death camps of different places of Poland.
I noticed in your teaching that you also speak about political millennialism with kind of a sarcastic or wry view that Marx and the attempt to create a heaven on earth is actually a misuse of biblical ideas. Explain that to our viewers.
Well, even the Nazis did this. They called it the 1,000-year Reich.
Right.
Okay, and so they had a millennialism.
Right.
And Marx had a millennialism too, in the sense he didn't think there's 1,000 years, but he believed that mankind, through industry progress, would eventually set up some form of government that was fair to everybody, and there'd be so many goodies that no one would fight anymore.
Right.
Okay, I mean, this is just madness, but they don't believe in a fallen world, see. They do in their own way, but they criticize other things, like the problem is that division of labor created this. So you have the people that have and the people that don't. So if we get rid of that problem through capitalism and through industry, then we're going to have a good life on the earth. And so you got to think about Karl Marx. Number one, he does have a Jewish background. Secondly, he has a Christian background. He is, I believe his dad was a Protestant pastor or something, some connection there. And those Judeo-Christian values is at the heart of his thinking still, even though he rejects all those things. Yet he has a forward-looking attitude toward the future. And that forward attitude toward the future is a biblical concept. Because of those influences, people want to bring the kingdom of God on earth, because this is all predicted in the Old Testament for the Jewish people in particular. It's countless passages. And so now people like Marx, they want to copy secularly wise. They're going to profane it,
Right.
and they're going to try to bring the kingdom in through secular politics, whatever it may be.
We see it all the time, you know, as a Jewish person who knows Jesus as Messiah and also loves Israel. I see my brothers and sisters, secular brothers and sisters in America particularly, trying to implement the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world, without God.
Yeah.
And then you wind up with these kinds of awry systems where you're
Sure.
overly green or overly sympathetic to an underdog in a way that defies Scripture and defies logic. And I see that all the time, and I think that's the danger here, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. I mean, if you don't believe in the fall of mankind, okay, you're going to try to recover it. Okay, how's this going to come about? Well, they want to go back to the Garden of Eden, even though they don't think such a thing existed. And yet they're going to spend all our money, taxes and regulators, to get us there. And it's just amazing the things that go on, and people don't realize how much the Bible has influenced their thinking.
I noticed you said spend all our money. That's the old joke about socialism works until you run out of other people's money.
Exactly, yeah.
So where do you draw your hope from? Knowing all you know and studying as deeply as you do, where do you draw your hope?
It's in God's promises for the future. I mean, He's going to straighten all these things out. And we know in the millennium He's going to set up that millennium. We can pet the lions like we all want to do today. It can't be done. If you do it now, you're in trouble. That's because we live in a fallen world. Remember, after Noah, the animals are now scared of us.
Right.
And at some point, God's going to straighten those things out. We need to trust Him. He's got a plan. And He's going to make nature unbelievable. It's during the millennium especially, but also the new heavens and new earth. And these are things to look forward to. And it's something that, in spite of the chaos we see today, it's, God has a plan. He's marching forward, and He's not disturbed by all the things happening around us, and we shouldn't be either.
Hi, a good question to ask yourself might be, where else can you find solid Bible teaching regarding prophecy for these last days? Well, Zola Levitt Ministries has been doing exactly that for more than 35 years and will continue with your support. Your gifts of financial support is what enables us to do this. We want to remind you there's 3 ways: online, through the mail, or just give us a phone call. And thank you.
The Valley of Hinnom points us to the reality of the difference between worshiping the Creator or the creation. Now, we believe in good stewardship, but it goes only so far.
Well, we believe in enjoying God's creation. He's given it to us for us to receive from Him, to be refreshed by Him. He said He'd bring us before streams in the desert, But God also gave us a very strong commandment. In Exodus, He said, I am the Lord thy God, and I am the one that brought you out of the house of Egypt, and you shall have no other gods before me. Not a God that you make, depicting heaven or earth or birds or anything in this realm, but you shall worship the invisible God who you see through the creation. Yes. And through His glory.
Yeah, and I think that conflict goes back to the very beginning. Abel and Cain had this conflict where there was a way to God that God chose, and then another way. What happened there?
Well, Cain chose to go by the way he chose, right? He chose to offer God the fruit of what he thought would be best. And that has a lot to do with the worship of earth. But Abel said, you know what? God covered us. He put the skin on us. He redeemed us by the blood, and the life is in the blood. And Abel offered up the right sacrifice.
Yeah, there's really one way. And Jesus is very clear that He is haderech, ha'emet, v'ha'chaim, the way, the truth, and the life. And that's why we can't worship any other thing, can we?
No, I mean, in Romans 1, it says that we cannot change the invisible God with corruptible things. We cannot worship things that we make with our own hands. I'm thinking of a gentleman that I shared the Lord with, Miles, early on in my faith, and he was an atheist, and I just simply shared the testimony of my faith. And one day he saw a sunset, and he called me on the phone and he said, I get it. I get that there's a maker behind this beautiful masterpiece that we see. So that's what we want.
That's great. So we see that we are to worship the Creator, not the creation, and that's the underlying difficulty with extreme environmentalism. As we said, we want to be stewards, but we want to be stewards under the dominion of the Most High.
You know, the Word of God has never lost its true meaning, and we can see it even playing out in our world today. The first murder was Cain and Abel.
Right.
When Cain...
Right.
You know, he said, you know, my sacrifice just is as good as yours.
Right.
When God specifically said, no, it's the blood of the Lamb that will redeem and that will cover you. It's not your own thoughts or your own fruits or your own way.
It really depends on whether you believe the Word and you believe the very beginning of the Word, perhaps the most salient message in the entire Bible, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If you believe He created it, then coming to Him His way and worshiping what He worships, what He says to worship, is the most important thing.
Right.
You know, we have an acquaintance who recently told us that 2/3 of humanity should be wiped out. This person considers herself an enlightened, New Age, forward-thinking person.
Right.
2/3 of humanity should be wiped out for the sake of the earth. How sad to believe that that would be in line with the values of God or the values of forward thinking.
Yeah.
But yet we see that all around us.
Right, right.
I was taken by Mark Musser's book, Nazi Oaks. I promised you I would mention it. In fact, I recommend that you read Nazi Oaks. It was captivating, but you could only read a few pages at a time. It's so well researched and it's so deep. Yeah.
Well, it's sobering to think that there'd be such a violent reaction against God and for the earth. It's that pagan foundation and that Baal worship, that foundation that Cain fell into that we don't want to fall into. We want to remember that we worship the one true God.
That's right. You know, to stay in touch with what we're doing here at the ministry and to be informed about what's going on with Israel, please ask for our Levitt letter. We'd be glad to send it to you for no charge at all. And we always want to remind you, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Our monthly newsletter, The Levitt Letter, is free and full of insightful articles and news commentary from a messianic perspective. Visit levitt.com to find our newsletter, along with current and past programs, our television schedule, and much more. Don't forget to order this week's resource by calling 1-800-WONDERS, or you can purchase it from our catalog at levitt.com. Your donations to Zola Levitt Ministries help these organizations bless Israel. Please remember, Zola Levitt Ministries depends on tax-deductible donations from viewers like you. This has been a paid program by Zola Levitt Ministries.